My wife's family called me a loser until I bought their company. Every Thanksgiving, my father-in-law made the same joke. He'd raise his glass, smile at everyone around the table, and say, "Let's be thankful for people who actually know how to succeed." Then he'd look directly at me. "And let's hope Ryan figures it out someday." The room always filled with laughter. I laughed too. Not because it was funny. Because arguing would have embarrassed my wife even more. For 6 years, I sat at that table listening to the same comments. 6 years of being the loser in the family. What none of them knew was that every insult pushed me one step closer to changing my life. My name is Ryan Carter, and this happened in Columbus, Ohio. I grew up in a middle-class family where money was tight, but respect wasn't. My dad drove delivery trucks for nearly 30 years. My mom worked as a receptionist at a medical clinic. Neither of them earned a fortune, but they taught me something I never forgot. Character is what people remember long after they forget your paycheck. At the time, I thought it sounded like one of those things parents say when they don't have much money. Years later, I realized it was the greatest lesson they ever gave me. I met my wife, Emily, during college. She was smart, kind, and completely different from the family she came from. Her father, Richard Monroe, owned Monroe Industrial Supply, one of the largest manufacturing companies in central Ohio. They lived in a mansion, owned vacation homes, drove luxury cars. Everything about their lives screamed success. The first time Emily invited me to dinner at her parents' house, I spent nearly an hour choosing a tie. I wanted to make a good first impression. Instead, I became the family joke. Richard shook my hand and asked, "So, Ryan, what do you do?" "I work in customer support for an internet company." He nodded politely. "And what's your real plan?" I frowned. "I'm sorry. I mean your career. This is my career." He smiled, the kind of smile people use when they don't want to say what they're actually thinking. Oh, that single word told me everything. Dinner didn't get much better. Emily's brother, Mark, talked about buying another rental property. Her mother discussed a charity gala attended by local CEOs. Richard explained why successful people never settle for average jobs. Every few minutes, someone would politely ask me another question about my work. Not because they cared, because they couldn't understand why anyone would choose a normal life. Driving home, Emily apologized. "I'm so sorry." "You don't have to apologize. I know my family." She sighed. "They judge everyone." I squeezed her hand. "I'm marrying you, not them." She smiled, but I could tell she still felt guilty. We got married a year later. Richard paid for the wedding. Everyone thought that meant he'd finally accepted me. It hadn't. The jokes simply became quieter. Every holiday, he'd ask the same question. "So, Ryan, still answering customer calls?" I'd smile and say yes. Inside, I promised myself one thing. One day, that answer would change. Not because I wanted his approval. Because I wanted more for myself. There was something nobody outside our apartment knew. Every evening after work, I sat in our tiny second bedroom with my laptop. While everyone else watched television, I taught myself software development. I wasn't trying to become the next tech billionaire. I simply noticed a problem. Small manufacturing companies struggled to keep track of inventory between warehouses. The software they used was expensive, outdated, and difficult to learn. I believed I could build something simpler. The first version was terrible. It crashed constantly. The second version wasn't much better. For nearly 2 years, I worked every night after my regular job. Sometimes until 2 in the morning. Emily would wake up, walk into my office, and quietly place a cup of coffee beside my keyboard. "You should get some sleep," she'd whisper. "Soon. You said that 3 hours ago." I'd laugh. "Just one more bug." She never complained. Not once. When our savings became tight because I kept spending money on software tools and servers, she picked up extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. One night I looked at her and said, "Maybe your dad is right." She looked up immediately. "About what?" "Maybe I'm wasting my time." She walked across the room, closed my laptop, and sat beside me. "I married you because you never give up." She held my hand. "If you quit now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened." The next morning, I opened my laptop again. A month later, my first paying customer signed up. It wasn't a huge company. Just a family-owned warehouse with 12 employees. They paid me $79 a month. I stared at the payment notification for almost 5 minutes. Most people would have laughed at such a small amount. I didn't, because it proved one thing. A stranger believed my software was worth paying for. Over the next year, that one customer became 5. 5 became 12, then 23. The monthly income still wasn't enough to replace my job. But it was growing, slowly, quietly. without anyone in Emily's family knowing. Then Thanksgiving arrived again. As everyone gathered around Richard's enormous dining table, he smiled across the room. "So, Ryan," he lifted his wine glass. "Still working that little customer service job?" I smiled. "For now." He laughed. "I admire your optimism." I looked around the table. No one had any idea that my little side project had just signed its first regional manufacturing company that very morning. The contract was worth more money than I'd earned in the previous 6 months at my regular job. I didn't tell them, not yet, because my father had always said something else. Success is loud enough. You never have to announce it. I had a feeling they were about to hear it on their own. My wife's family called me a loser until I bought their company. 2 months after Thanksgiving, I finally made the hardest decision of my life. I walked into my manager's office, placed my company badge on his desk, and resigned. He looked surprised. "Are you sure about this, Ryan?" I nodded. "I've never been more sure." That afternoon I drove home feeling excited and terrified. For the first time in years, I didn't have a guaranteed paycheck waiting for me at the end of the month. Everything depended on the software I'd been building in our spare bedroom. When I told Emily I'd officially quit, she smiled, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered, "I knew this day would come." Not everyone shared her confidence. A week later, Richard called. "I heard you quit your job." I did. "What happened?" "I left." "You mean they fired you?" I laughed quietly. "No, I resigned." There was a long silence before he finally spoke. "So, you're unemployed." "I'm running my company full-time." Another silence. Then he sighed. "I hope you know what you're doing." That Sunday, the whole family gathered for Mark's birthday dinner. As soon as I walked through the door, Richard smiled. "I heard you're an entrepreneur now." Everyone looked at me. Mark chuckled. "So, how much has this little business made?" I shrugged. "We're doing okay." He laughed. "That's not a number." I didn't answer. There was no point. Some people don't listen because they want to understand. They listen because they're waiting to judge. The next year became the busiest of my life. Our software spread through Ohio faster than I ever imagined. Manufacturing companies recommended us to each other. One warehouse became 10. 10 became 50. Soon, businesses from neighboring states started calling. I hired my first employee. Then my second. Within 18 months, we had moved out of our apartment and into a real office. Emily left the hospital to help manage customer operations. For the first time, our business truly felt real. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. One of our sales managers walked into my office carrying a folder. "You should see this." Inside was a list of companies requesting software demonstrations. Halfway down the page, one name made me stop breathing. Monroe Industrial Supply. Emily looked over my shoulder. "My dad's company." I nodded. Neither of us said a word. A week later, Richard walked into our office. He had no idea who owned the company. Our sales director greeted him and began demonstrating the software. I watched quietly through the conference room window. After nearly an hour, Richard looked impressed. "This is exactly what we've been looking for." Our sales director smiled. "The owner would love to meet you before we finalize anything." Richard nodded. "Of course." A few moments later, I opened the conference room door. His smile disappeared instantly. "Ryan. Good to see you, Richard." For the first time since I'd known him, he couldn't find the right words. "You." He looked around the office. "This is your company." "It is." He slowly sat back down. "I had no idea." "I know." He looked around the room again. Employees hurried between offices. Large monitors displayed customer data from companies across the country. The small side project he'd laughed about had become something far bigger than he ever imagined. Richard lowered his eyes. "I guess I underestimated you." I smiled politely. "You underestimated persistence." 3 months later, Monroe Industrial Supply signed a multi-year software contract with us. It became one of our biggest clients. Ironically, the loser was now helping improve the efficiency of the company that had spent years mocking him. Life has a strange sense of humor. Not long after, news broke that several large investors wanted to sell their shares in Monroe Industrial Supply. The company wasn't failing, but it had fallen behind competitors because it resisted modern technology. Our business had grown rapidly, and for the first time, we had enough capital to consider acquisitions. My advisors placed several companies on the table. One name stood out: Monroe Industrial Supply. I stared at it for a long time. Emily noticed. "You don't have to do this." I looked at her. "I'm not doing it for revenge." "Then why?" "Because it's a good business, and I know exactly how to make it better." 6 months later, the deal was complete. Our company became the majority owner of Monroe Industrial Supply. The following Thanksgiving, we gathered around Richard's dining table once again. The room felt strangely quiet. Nobody made jokes. Nobody asked if I still worked customer service. Richard stood slowly, holding his glass just as he had every year. He looked around the table before turning toward me. I've spent years measuring people by their job titles, their salaries, and their bank accounts. His voice shook slightly. I was wrong. The room became completely silent. He looked me in the eyes. Ryan, I'm sorry. I smiled. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. He nodded toward Emily. You took care of my daughter. Then he looked around at everyone else. And today, you're taking care of my company too. I raised my glass. I never wanted to beat this family. I looked at Richard. I only wanted the chance to prove that success doesn't always make noise. Sometimes, it grows quietly while everyone else is busy laughing. For years, they called me a loser because they judged the paycheck I brought home. They never saw the work I was doing after everyone else had gone to sleep. In the end, I didn't need revenge. Watching the people who once doubted me finally understand my worth was enough. Because the greatest comeback isn't making your critics feel small. It's becoming the kind of person who no longer needs their approval.